Hey everyone, welcome to the Seller Finance and Creative Deals podcast. I'm Dan Deppen, and today I'm joined by Dee Simpson of Coordinated Connect, who's a transaction coordinator who's going to fill us in on all the things that they can do to help us. So, Dee, how you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining. I appreciate it. I think you're the first TC we've had on
Yeah,
here, which
woo.
is a cool piece. So yeah, so maybe you can just tell us a little bit about like your background and how you got involved in all this stuff.
Um, I got into real estate by accident, to be honest. One of the companies that I work with in insurance went bankrupt and he wanted to help me find a job. So I got into real estate that way, doing property management. Um, Started there. Then I went
Hmm.
into being an executive assistant for a real estate broker who was also an investor. And then that's when I got into transaction coordination. And I didn't know the whole time that's what I was doing. So that's
Yeah,
how I got
and
started.
for me, I wasn't even like that familiar with the fact that they even really existed because like most of my experience was buying and selling notes where you don't necessarily need to use them, although it can be very helpful to do that.
Yeah,
So
it can be very helpful.
how was your property management experience?
Doing property management, I did more of the residential side, assisting with that. One thing I had learned is that I didn't really like it. I mean, I like doing the back end, but I didn't like when they had to do with finding contractors to
Hmm.
fix. Because if you have a really good contractor, sometimes it's hard to get to him because they always booked. So you need at least two to three on the back end to make sure they could come help, especially when they have an emergency. And it was a headache when we had one property that went south, like the foundation, the plumbing, the septic tank was just there was raccoons and I didn't like it.
Oh, wow. No, no, where part of the country were you doing that in?
This was in Central Florida.
Yeah.
hmm It was not fun with this. So I was like, okay, maybe I don't like that as much. I mean, it'll come more smoother if it's streamlined. You already have your in-house contractors. But if you don't
Hmm.
have that, finding vendors that know what they're doing and know how to do the paperwork and give invoices and stuff in a timely manner, it can be difficult when it's on the residential side. So,
Yeah, I know like for me, I've done a lot of non-performing notes and when I end up with REOs, they're like one-offs in these random places. And so you're finding like
hmm
brand new vendors for the first time to do like one
hmm
thing, and it's usually like a total nightmare. It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't like that part, but I do like the administrative side of real estate. I like to see the behind the scenes, how people think, how they do things. That's more my speed.
Yeah, gotcha. So then tell us a little more about like well, I guess maybe start by tell us a little bit about like what transaction coordinators do, because some of the audience has done a lot of creative deals and they're familiar with that, but for other folks, like they are probably not familiar at all.
Yeah, with transaction coordinator, we normally come in when there's an executed contract. So that means you already have your purchase agreement, sales agreement, you already know the funding and everything like that. And what we do, we take the documents that we have and see the big picture of what's going on. We verify that the documents and the information in there says what it says, and then we start to facilitate the transaction. So we're more like the customer service rep for the transaction or the project manager for the
Mm-hmm.
transaction. We make sure that we talk to everyone, we introduce ourselves to everyone, we verify that the title company that you're using do help with your type of transaction because most title companies do with real estate agents. They don't always do with investors. So you have to make sure that the title company you choose definitely do your creative deal. We once we understand the deals, we coordinate with escrow to open it, make sure they understand the instruction of how we see the deal going. Then I make sure deadlines are met, contingencies are met. If any corrections that happen along the way, I'll help set up the documents. We sign off for signatures. We review the final HUDs to make sure that anything that needs to be on there is there. There has been times where people almost miss their commission or their payout because one line item was missing. So we're the second
Mm.
eyes behind everything to make sure that you get what you need out of your whole deal. So that's the gist of it.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's probably hard to keep all of those terms straight because I know even just on the underwriting side, like I don't get involved in closings and things like that, but a lot of times investors have things that are changing. They're like, oh, we're changing the fees, we're charging, or even like pricing will
Yeah,
change.
yeah, yeah, it changes all the time. So we're here to make sure that you don't have to juggle everything by yourself, especially if you're trying to scale your business. If you have multiple deals, you should be out there finding more deals while we do the back end for you. And make sure it goes smoothly. We don't always, I mean, we always start at execution of contract, but there's some of us that will help with talking with your client and let them know what's going on with the deal and what you understand about the deal. And if anything needs to be clarified, we'll go back and talk to you and talk to them, and then we'll solidify the deal. What we don't do, we don't prepare documents. Unless we're
Uh-huh.
licensed to, we don't, we always tell everyone to go to an attorney, especially a creative attorney, if you need help with that and your document preparation.
Hmm.
We do not negotiate deals because we're not licensed real estate agents, so we cannot negotiate deals on your behalf. So you go that route. We can help you with your mortgage note if you're owner finances. That's where you come in.
Hmm.
You go to an underwriter and we help and we direct them to your way. So we're just like a la carte service. Like if you need us, most real estate agents and investors use us behind the scene and they pay us on the back end of closing. A lot of
Uh-huh.
people don't know they pay us, but we're on there
Right.
when they hire us.
Well, because it sounds like you guys do a lot of the stuff that like investors usually don't want to and aren't
Hmm.
necessarily good at. Like I know for me personally, I can be good at keeping track of all the little details and pulling things together, but it takes a
Hmm.
lot of time, and that's not really what I want to be doing
Right.
at
And
times.
I don't have a problem doing that. I like to see things put together and see how the deal comes together and how we get to closing. I like that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. So like what are the some of the common like mistakes you see investors make or problems, they kind of commonly run into in the
well, one, they don't
process?
read. They don't read their contracts. They just want the deal to be done. So oftentimes they don't read, especially if they're new to it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they don't know how to structure their own contracts and stuff because some of them are new and they don't always know. So you may like for me, for instance, like I go over the documents. Did you consider these clauses or stuff like that? Did you talk to your attorney about that? Like, oh, I didn't think about it. So me I'm going through the documents, helping them understand certain things, make them question, oh, I didn't consider that. I didn't think about that. So reading and understanding how to do their documents, that's a
Mm-hmm.
common mistake that I do see. Yeah, that's pretty much the biggest one. Just not knowing um, what laws and stuff they need to consider and stuff on top of that too. But
Yeah, I know. I get a lot of questions on that stuff,
mm,
and it's
mm,
really hard. I mean, especially if you're talking about anything like owner occupied, consumer related, because there's a lot of state specific rules and they change them
yeah, yeah,
all the time, and it's like almost impossible to keep up with.
yeah.
So now, do you have
That-
like if somebody comes to you and they're like, "Hey, I'm doing my first one and I don't have a title company or an attorney or all that," like do you have vendors that kind of you generally work with, or does the investor just kind of point you to like here's the map of who I'm using and then you go reach out to them?
Yeah, you most of the time you always want to give people three options, but yes, I'll have a list of people they may need on my back end, but I will give them the list and they could choose for what they want because I don't want to be responsible if anything goes wrong with the
Yeah.
relationship. But yes, I will help them find anybody. And if I don't have anything like for example, if you even need a plumber, I might not have a plumber, but I have people in my network that can help me find a plumber in your area.
Yeah, the recommendations are always tricky because vendor quality changes over time. Like in the some of the ones that I use, whether it be
Hmm.
like attorneys or um, loan servicers and things like that. Like I've had ones where they'll have stretches where they're really good,
Hmm.
and then for whatever reason, maybe a key person left or there was a change,
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden, like they're not so good. And I've also
yeah,
had them flip back the other direction where I had ones where at first they were terrible, but then things got really good. So
you're
yeah, it's
good.
always tricky too because when people ask me, they're like, "Oh, I heard about this," and I'm like, "Well, that happened with that vendor like 6 years ago." So it's kind of,
Yeah,
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 it's
that's
always
that's
kind of
good.
hard to tell. So yeah, you can't really be like necessarily liable for how it
Yeah,
goes
yeah, yeah. So
with
you want to give
them.
them the options with that. Another thing we do with other services we offer is like if you need to set up with a servicing company, like if you're doing your owner finance, you need to make sure, payment is going through the servicing company. We'll help set that up as well. And then if you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to do the like setting up your HOAs and your utilities and stuff like that, we also have that as a service as well that we can assist with too.
Tell me more about how the boarding works. I ask because this is like a common problem that I have when
The
I
loan
try to
boarding,
get
like
them
most of
set
the
up.
time on our end, we don't do the loan boarding, but what I normally do, I just prepare the paperwork on what they may need to be qualified for the loan. So I don't know,
Oh,
like,
gotcha.
yeah. So we don't normally do that. So like I said, everything is executed when it comes to us. But anything that I can do to make the process easier for the underwriter or anything like that, they'll give me the list of what's needed. And then
Mm-hmm.
I'll make sure that I communicate it to the buyer that this is what's needed to qualify you for the loan. And then I just make sure that everybody have what they need in order for the qualification for the buyer to happen.
Gotcha. Like, what are some of the loan servicers that you tend to commonly work with, or that your investors are working with?
Um, I would say like more, I mean, it had to be nationwide. I mean, definitely I think it's like let's think of it. Westar Servicing. Have
Oh,
you ever heard of them?
I've so it's interesting. So I've heard of them. I've not used them yet. I've been meaning to
Hmm.
look into that, but I know like a lot of the creative finance people use them.
Yeah,
Because aren't I mean I think they're pretty good with wrap loans from what I've been told. I've never used them firsthand
right.
because I know somebody like if you're creating a wrap, some loan servicers are happy to do that. Maybe there's an extra fee or
Mhm.
whatever, but then there's some loan
Yeah.
servicers that just like I think FCI might not do them anymore,
Hmm.
but I'm not totally sure on that one. But yeah, I need to look into Westar. The other one that I'm planning to use soon that I haven't yet is Provident.
Provident. I
Yeah,
don't know if I know about them.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's his name is Sohail, the guy that runs that. But I know they're supposed to be really good. But I've already got 4 loan servicers, so it's like, how many
Okay.
do I need overall? So,
Hmm.
and then I believe you're a pretty big like systems person as well. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the kind of standard operating procedures you've put together or how you approach kind of trying to systematize your business.
I normally systematize everything based on what it was the foundation of real estate. I look at it, the document tells you everything. The structure starts there. Like whatever information is in there, that's how I start to systematize everything. Um, from how can I say it? What like basically if I have I know from up top, like if I'm dealing with a seller, I need to know if and especially if a seller that said they free and clear.
Mm-hmm.
I know that in title, they need to make sure that that is free and clear. So I would ask for like a lien letter release. You know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
talking about?
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
not all mortgages recorded with the county that you already paid off your whole home note. They don't always do that. So they may need to have that on the record saying that they have paid it off because I had a situation where that happened. The mortgage was
Oh,
still on.
yeah, because I was gonna say, like, how would you even know if the seller had like an unrecorded land contract out there
How
or
would you
something
an
like that?
unrecorded
Yeah.
land contract? Well, it should be an escrow. Is it wouldn't be an escrow? So it's
Well, no,
unrecorded because
it
is it
should be, I guess, just like I've bought a lot of land contracts, and so
mm-hmm,
if they're not recorded, the seller is still on the deed. They work kind of like
you're right.
on auto loan. And there was
Mm-hmm,
one time I bought a land contract and I found out later because the paperwork was like in the file, like in the hard file, there was this earlier land contract they had created for somebody who like I don't know what happened, but they weren't there. They like
mm-hmm,
took off. And so there were actually 2 open liens on the property. There was the one I knew about,
mm-hmm,
and then there was this other one floating around out there. And so what I had to do was skip trace the old borrower, and I actually was able to track them down and
Okay.
signed the
Well, that's
cancellation.
good.
So I got it taken care of, but I always kind of wondered like what stops somebody from creating a bunch of those because it's not like a mortgage deed of trust that
What keeps
automatically gets recorded. Sometimes they do, sometimes land contracts are recorded, sometimes they're not, but
yeah, sometimes they're not. If it's not fully executed, like you talking about the deed, you trying to understand if that deed isn't recorded, how does it work? Like, or are you saying like,
no, I mean, so if they have a like so if somebody had a borrower in the property on a loan, but instead of doing a mortgage or deed of trust, they just did
mm,
a land contract. And depending on, the state and whatnot, those don't necessarily have to be recorded.
they don't?
Yeah, so that's
Mm,
what I mean. Like you could potentially have somebody that has like a land contract floating out
yeah.
there that,
Is it a reason? Is it was based on a strategy? Because I know, do they have a
yeah, so
memorandum on
people
them
use,
or?
well, so people do land contracts for all kinds of different reasons. And these days, so let me back up. So if you have a land contract, it works kind of like an auto loan where the lender
Mhm.
stays on the deed and then the borrower has a
Yeah.
loan. And
Hmm.
traditionally, in most states, if the borrower defaults and you got to take it, and the lender has to take it through the legal process to get it back, it's generally a much faster, cheaper process than doing a
Yeah.
foreclosure on a
Yeah.
mortgage. So a lot of, so there are a lot of lenders who have created those kind of for that reason. The problem, though, that you can get into is because they're not necessarily recorded and the lender's on title and not the borrower. There are lenders who have engaged in, use those for bad behavior, let's call it that. And so a lot of attorney generals are really down on them. So in some states like Texas, I don't know if they actually ban them or, like a lot of states have changed the rules
Hmm.
to where you're basically going through a similar legal process for the land contract. Like they've either kind of banned them or made the rules so prohibitive, like you would never want to
Make more restrictions on how to
create
use it.
one. Like I think Georgia might have some of those rules
Hmm.
as well. So for me personally, if I'm originating, I'm probably always going to do a mortgage or deed of trust. But I know there are a lot of investors, and I'll have to have some of them on the podcast. They'll use land. They'll create land contracts as part of wrap deals or subject to deals because then the name on title doesn't change hands, and they do that as a tactic to try to avoid triggering
The
due on
dual self.
sale. So I think actually this podcast will have come out afterwards, but the day after we're recording this, I'm going to have Caleb. I'm doing a webinar with Caleb Christopher, who's kind of an expert on due on sale.
Mhm.
Like
Dual self.
that's
Mm-hmm.
like all he does is
Hmm.
nerd out on that. So after that,
Yeah.
like I'll personally be a little more informed
Right.
on
Right.
how that works. But for my money right now, like I kind of I'm not creating any new,
Hmm.
land contracts at the
Okay.
moment. So what are some of the more call them like interesting or complicated type of deals that you get involved in? Like, are most of them sort of straightforward
Uh,
sales, or like how creative do people get?
not. I can tell you that no deal is ever the same.
Mm-hmm.
No deal is ever the same. It depends on the structure, how it goes. So you said the most interesting deals, like what you're asking me, like in regards of what I had to do, or
Or just any like creative structures that people are putting together.
I
Like some,
haven't
yeah.
I haven't done anything too crazy. I mean, it's more so more subject twos.
Mm-hmm.
When they take over the property. I mean. The only thing I've been more so the back end where I'm talking to judges and paralegals because sometimes they don't even do what they need to do in order to get things done sometimes, especially if you're dealing with older folks who have power of attorney that needs to be filed with the court in order for the deal to go to closing. So
Yeah. So if people aren't familiar with like subject twos, like what types of things do you have to do as part of a subject two deal that you might not be doing if it was just a traditional sale?
like what you need to do, I mean, you need to make sure you have certain disclosures, like your seller disclosures. They also call it like a cover your asset type of thing when you give the all the necessary warnings when you do the deal with somebody. You have to have these addendums. So like they normally have the sub two package that some people
Mm-hmm.
give. They have out there that you must have everything in there to make sure that you're covered. Because you know sometimes, like for example, a lot of people know subject to the existing mortgage, but a lot of people don't know that if you own your own home, your name is on the deed, and you're paying monthly on your house note, you own your property subject to your existing mortgage. So it's just as that
Mm-hmm.
simple as that. People don't look at it, but that people doing subject to every day, you know.
Yeah.
So I don't think people look at it like that. I forgot the question, but
Well, just like
what you said?
when you're putting together like a subject to transaction, so the the buyer, I guess, is going to leave existing financing in
Yeah.
place
Oh
that
yeah.
was in the
Okay. So,
name
so
of the seller. Like what are some of the other like
yeah,
are there any
because
other
like
like mechanics
subject
that
to
need to
is more
happen?
so like a title term. Is a title term is subject to whatever is on the actual title. So most people
Mm-hmm.
know it's to the existing first lien of the mortgage, the first position mortgage. But you have to be very clear on your contract what other liens you're willing to take over.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you said subject to the title, then you in trouble. Because like, what if you got a child support lien or HOA lien or
Yeah.
all those other liens on the title? He's like, you didn't clarify. Because if you didn't clarify, then you saying that you taking over what's on the actual title. So you got to list the items that you actually going to take on subject to the
Oh, that's interesting
property.
because I know like a lot of times when I pull title reports, there
Hmm.
are all these other liens that will show up that are
Yes.
not necessarily attached to the property, but they're attached to the maybe the borrower
Yes.
on the mortgage. Like
Exactly.
I've seen like IRS stuff and
Hmm.
medical
Yeah.
liens and mechanics liens and all
Yeah,
sorts of
and those type of
things.
liens are the ones that will cloud your title because that means it's not transferable, and it's not insurable unless these things are taken care of. But with a mortgage,
Mm-hmm.
it's just an encumbrance that can be transferable and it can be insurable. So you guys got to know those different terms and understand um how they work. Yeah.
Yeah. So when someone buys a property subject to the existing mortgage, like how do they actually make the payments on that
They normally
mortgage?
like well, they normally suggest that you do it through a servicing company, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because you know you got to protect both the seller and the buyer because there might be a situation where the buyer don't make their payments and something happens for the seller, and it might be a situation where the seller may take the buyer's money but don't put it towards the mortgage. So you need like
Yeah. Almost
you
like
know
a
that
rent skimming type of.
yeah, so you don't want to do that. So you want to have the servicing company that can help you with your subject to or your seller finance deal, whatever agreement you have, so they can disperse it. And then it'll also provide a paper trail, especially if it's a buyer who don't have any credit, they can do it's kind of like a manual underwriting. They have a paper
Mm-hmm.
trail with the servicing company. It'll make it easier for them to refinance um uh home note. Yeah,
Gotcha. That makes sense. So, like in that case, the payments your end buyer are making, say, on the new loan, they
mm-hmm.
go to the loan servicer, and then the loan
Mm-hmm.
servicer disperses the funds between the
Yeah, all
existing
parties.
underlying
Right.
lien that was bought subject
Mm-hmm.
to, and then
Exactly. And
the
if you
new one.
do the hybrid where you do a subject to, and then you know how there's some equity still on the property, and you might owner finance that and put a second lien on that housing that you owe. Based on that,
Mm-hmm.
then they can also take care of that with the servicing company and they'll dispute funds based on whatever is agreed on the contract, from the contract.
Yeah, because I always wondered, like, what happens if somebody is unscrupulous and they do one of those deals and they just
Mm-hmm.
collect money on the one lien and don't pay out the other. Like, because I've had
Other, yeah.
loans that I've owned where the borrower defaulted, took off, rented the property, and just collected rent while they were, yeah. Rented. I've had that happen more than once. It's a thing. It's a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's also situations where you could also put like I guess with the service company, it's kind of like an escrow pile. Like if you're afraid that the buyer might miss a month or so, you can also put in the terms in the terms of the contract that you'll put a deposit, just like a safety net, just in case a
It,
payment is missed.
and
So
that's,
the
and that's, yeah, that's not a bad idea. Like in case a
hmm
payment's missed, and it seems like it's not a
hmm
bad idea too to have funds like up front just in case there's any like hiccups and delays getting everything set up and the first payment
yeah, absolutely. So
coming
there's
in.
ways around it to protect yourself as much as you possibly can. But yeah, just
Yeah.
gotta know when to apply it.
No, that makes sense. Well, cool. That's a lot
Mhm.
of very valuable info. So Dee, how do people get a hold of you, or where can they, reach you to learn more?
Yes, they can contact me through contact@coordinatedconnect.com, or you can contact me through d@coordinatedconnect.com, or you can visit my website at www.coordinatedconnect.com.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks again, and I'll throw all those links in the notes and everything so people
Yes, thank
can
you for
find
having
them.
me.
All right, anytime.
All right.
All right.
All right.